Second session that we've got is in conjunction with ICS, and we're looking at responsible business, and it's a subject area that ICS have been talking about for a period of time, and it's something which has been looked at very much internally within the organisation, but we're now starting to look at what does that mean for the property sector as a whole. So the ICS does an awful lot of work from its chartered surveying backgrounds and looking at the occupier levels for organisations. And what does that mean in terms of the responsible business programme? So Matthew mentioned last time that I was chair of the carbon group within EIC. I also chair the ICS Responsible Business Forum. There's a day job somewhere linked into that as well. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is around that responsible business. So what's the new approach, the new structure that we're starting to look as part of that? The panel that we've got here, so we've got so Chris is also here as well, but we've got Anna from ICS, Victoria from Vinci, and Munish from the UK Green Building Council, adding on a bit of additional insights in here as well. But what I want to start off with was a short video to take you through some of the challenges that we've got and the reason why we set up the Responsible Business Programme. So it's a short video, but it explains an awful lot as to where the drivers come from about where we are. And a lot of these things have happened over the last 5 or so years, but moving on from that, we've got a suite of additional changes which are also starting to come through. And our target audience is quite large, and we're looking at this from a building life cycle perspective. Main reason for that is it is all interconnected. At the end of the day, from the initial planning applications which are going into changes which happen on developments, through its design, through its construction, into its use, and then into its next stage of life, dismantling, etc., is all interconnected. If we have a poor design and poor construction, we live with that poor building for the next 80 years. So how do we get that structured correctly? If we have the poor developments at the beginning because we don't have the right planning applications put in, we live with that following on as well. So how do we get this knowledge transfer going through that says, if we understand what the right community that we want is, actually great things start to happen. And we have some really good examples of where that works. So closest to home, we have the King's Cross developments at Argent. That is a great, vibrant place which has helped to develop not only a community spirit, but it has also improved asset values quite significantly, improved hugely the amount of money that the local council receives as well, business rates, community rates, etc., as a result of that. But it's also helped in terms of health, crime rates, etc., which have all improved as well. So we look at this from a holistic perspective as we run through from the investor levels and what are investors looking. Well, if they're going to get buildings that are occupied more and asset values go up, investors become happy with the returns that they get, and they're able to talk about higher levels of returns. Occupiers are happy because they're not only nice places to work within, they're nice places to live, and they're nice communities to spend your time outside. So that means stress levels go down, sickness levels go down as well, and you have a better quality of life. It also means, how do we get the right service providers to come and support us as part of that journey? Procurement has been often spoken about as a key gap and a barrier as part of that as well. So how do we get the supply chain linked up as part of this collaborative model? And current position that we're in, so we're looking at a series of key enablers across this piece. Culture change as a major activity. Yes, to make change, you've got to have a top-down and a bottom-up, but at the end of the day, in order for change to occur, it has to be led by the organisation, but more importantly, it's got to be led by the management team as a whole, not by an individual. So the organisation as a whole needs to buy into that concept to make that change and to occur. There's a variety of ways as to how that happens, depending upon the organisation itself. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all, but it is about how do we generate that change to begin with. We also start to look at the individuals, the people themselves as well, the occupiers within the spaces. There's a lot of change in terms of behaviours of individuals. We've spoken, and the video spoke about 4 generations being involved in there. Occupier expectations in a few years' time as well. The amount of data that we can have on our smartphones as well, telling us the air quality within a building, etc., helps to be able to drive some of those changes. And the last key enabler that we've got is around technology. And the amount of data that we have in buildings is huge, but we don't use much of it. I think the stat that came out from the WebF session, which Rick's holds, was we actually use only about 1% of data that we capture in buildings. What do we do with the other 99% of that data? What's the accuracy of the information that we capture? So we have thousands of sensors that might end up in these buildings. How do we utilise that knowledge? And if we move forwards, we're going to enter into a realm where we have data which enables us to identify individuals and the way that those individual characteristics operate. We may not be able to define a person from that by name, but we will certainly be able to define a characteristic of that individual. Who owns that data? If we've identified a character from that, do they have a right to know that we hold that data on them? So if the next stage of GDPR that comes in around data which real estate will start to own. So what are the mechanisms, the parameters for that? when we start to look at the criteria, there's these 5 criteria that we're starting to look at. And it's saying, what would this look like against these 5 individual areas? So things like management commitments, the group understanding around what's going on, the ethics, the governance bits in there, the diversity and the collaboration across the groups as well, including supply chain investors, etc. Well-being and employment for the individuals that comes through. Community supplier engagement as part of that holistic review, and the environmental protection and what we have today, but also what we need for the future as well. So that's the scope of the work that we've got. So ring-fenced small. So it's a long journey that we've got. We are launching at MIPIM next week. It's part of that. So there'll be some collateral materials which will be coming out onto the ICS website next week as part of that. But this is a journey, and we want involvement and engagement from the sector to be able to develop this further. What I'd like to do then is, for the panel then, if you go one by one, introduce yourselves, but also if you can then explain yourselves what this means for your organisations. Munish?
Thanks, Sunil. Thanks, Sunil. And thank you for inviting me onto the panel to speak. It's great to be here. I've done quite a lot of work with MEUC in the past, in a previous life at Marks & Spencer. So I led sustainability at Marks & Spencer for its property estate until late last year. I now work with the UK Green Building Council and also with the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership as a senior associate there. So this is a big question, isn't it? What is responsible business? And I think the answer is not a static one. I think it's changing all the time. That video was a good indication of how the world around us is dynamically changing at ever greater pace. So I think the tact I want to take is that responsible business is no longer looking within your direct operations. I think it's a value chain approach. And even at Marks & Spencer, in its last version of its sustainability strategy, it was taking that value chain approach and even looking at carbon from a science-based targets point of view. And that's very much a value chain approach. So looking at supply chain emissions, looking at customer emissions, and understanding the responsibility of a business to mitigate those right across them. And making bold commitments, like all of the companies that have got approved science-based targets around things like, in M&S's case, 90% carbon reductions by 2030 across its entire value chain, not just its operations. And that equating to 14 million tonnes of carbon, all of which was aligned with the science-based approach, which is aligning with what the scientists are saying we need to do in order to keep below that 1.5 degree threshold. For UK Green Building Council, it means mobilising the whole industry behind actually what does things like net zero carbon mean. We have now got a cohort of about 30 to 40 of our members that are involved in this piece of work, this programme, Advancing Net Zero, which is actually not just a UK programme, but it's a worldwide programme with the World Green Building Council to actually define, because everyone talks about it and it's easy to talk about, but actually to define what does zero carbon mean, both from an operational point of view, but also more significantly from an embodied carbon point of view as well. And taking it even beyond carbon, really, and the responsibility of business from a social point of view, and defining what things like social value means. Again, a great buzzword in the industry at the moment, but not actually very well understood, and certainly not very consistently applied, and definitely not consistently measured. So how do we do that? And human rights. You know, the property sector is one of the high-risk areas where human rights abuses happen. So what responsibility do businesses have in terms of making sure that they're mitigating some of those human rights risks in their supply chains, in particular, property being a risk sector, as I've said. I don't know if it's been talked about yet, but the Sustainable Development Goals are a great framework for the world entire, actually, to adopt a much more holistic view on responsibility. And if you don't know them, I'd really encourage you to have a look at them. As a senior associate at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, we've done significant work in the last 3 years, actually looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and actually making them simpler for business, for government, for civic society to understand in 10 interconnected tasks. And that piece of work is called Rewiring the Economy. So I think responsibility for a business has become much more about its entire impact at every touch point with society that it has in its supply chain as well as in its customer chain. It's no longer sort of consigned purely to its own operations. And I think that would be where I'll end my piece here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victoria Hughes. I work for Vinci Facilities, which is the facilities management part of the wider Vinci Construction UK. So I've been managing our sustainable business strategy in Vinci Facilities for about 9 years now. I've recently been promoted to the position of Responsible Business Director. So now I'm looking at it in a much wider context. I see business responsibility similar to my learned colleague here has just explained, but I really see it as we've always looked at stakeholder consultation through part of our sustainability strategy. Through a facilities management company, you'd be quite remiss not to involve your stakeholders in how you're managing their estate. So we've always had quite a wide-ranging consultation process across the board. Now, going forward, what I think is going to change in our business, embracing more responsibility, is transparency. So we're going to be much more transparent about the data and the information that we hold as a business. Now, Sunil said we only manage about 10% of that. The advances in technology is fundamental to improving what we're currently looking at, our science-based targets. There's a significant amount of work that's going on in our own business and the industry as a whole to try and look at how we can utilise this data to have more meaningful impacts upon health and well-being, on productivity, efficiency, and while some people are apprehensive about the adoption of technology, automation, etc., of all of the research I've read, that's actually universally positive. People are necessarily, yes, it will lose jobs, but their jobs will be replaced by something else. So in effect, it will probably improve productivity overall as UK PLC. Moving forward, as I say, we've got lots of work to do. We're looking at the BITC, Responsible Business Framework, and I think it's interesting to see some of the drivers and enablers you put up there because there are some overlap between those. I think as an industry it's difficult because there's lots of things being thrown at us from lots of different places, and my role is to try and look at all these elements, the Building Council, RICS, BITC, there are SDGs, you name it, there's lots out there that we all have to look at. I think as an individual business, it's difficult to pull all those things together into a cohesive, meaningful strategy for you as a business without the competing aspects of which potentially some of your clients and wider stakeholders are pushing you towards. I could carry on, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Anna Badgery from the RICS. I work within the International Standards team, particularly focusing on property, that's residential, commercial and facilities management. Delighted to be here. Thanks, Sunil, again, for inviting me. So as the video has demonstrated, we've done quite a lot of work with our stakeholders in identifying what the future challenges of the professions as a whole will be. The term responsible business is not new to us, but actually the work that we're undergoing with Sunil is a big chunk of what we're looking to do in this area moving forward. We worked with the UN Global Compact to release a responsible business toolkit, which was updated last year, and the entire purpose of this toolkit is to align the SDGs with land, property and construction, and where we've got a role to play in that. The conversation has now moved on, so we launched the Responsible Business Forum in the summer of last year with the intention of moving the core, sort of the shoulds or the musts contained within the Responsible Business Toolkit and evolve that to practical solutions. And that's where we're at this stage. It's trying to capture the insight from the industry, working in collaboration with organisations such as UK GBC and various initiatives will enable us to identify where the consistencies lie in terms of challenges and where there are need for us to develop a global solution for organisations in developing their own responsible business agendas, as you've mentioned there, Victoria. There's fundamentally a need for us to all collaborate. I think the industry needs to collaborate a lot more, particularly when we're looking at this issue. The opportunity is there now for us to be proactive in this area, and I think over the coming months we'll be able to extract some real concrete evidence as to what direction we need to take. And I think we want to be in a position where we're developing evidence-based solutions for the industry as a whole. And I think this piece of work will demonstrate that. So a lot of work to do, as you mentioned, but we're very passionate about this, and I think we've got a session at MIPIM on responsible business, which our CEO is facilitating, and then moving forward with the help that Sunil has given us and other organisations, hopefully we'll be in a position to develop some really good solutions for the target audiences that we've clarified. At the moment, we're focusing on the supply chain. We've done a lot of work around developing standards for facilities management, which has recently released the procurement of facilities management professional statement, which is going to be global. Recently released an anti-money laundering professional statement, which is global at the moment. We'll be reviewing our code of ethics and sort of ethical standards from a perspective. So there's a lot of work going on, but I think there's definitely opportunities here for us to, together as an industry, to make the world a better place to live in. Thank you.
Last one. Good afternoon, Chris Havers. So I am running the Sustainable Facilities Management Index, which is very much at the heart of responsible business, because we're challenging and looking to drive the facilities management service providers of the UK to be more sustainable, to implement many elements of what we see responsible business and sustainability, so covering environmental issues, social issues, and also governance issues. So what is responsible business to me? I think businesses have to generate income. That's very much the nature, but for me it's about how are they generating that income? Is it to the detriment of society around them and to the environment around them? Or actually, are they able to contribute to the society and to the environment while also making that profit? So that's why I'm very excited to be working on this particular project, because we want to be using the learnings from the Sustainable Management Index, where we're looking at we look at 23 different criteria of what makes a responsible business within the facilities management industry. And we're looking to really kind of take those learnings over and help shape the outcome of this project.
Thanks very much, guys. So we've got a great panel here. I'll open the floor up to questions. Are there any questions? Anyone want to put the first one forward?
It seems that the word responsible business has replaced the word sustainability, where in the past there were people, particularly say local authorities, whose role was to be the sustainable manager or the person accountable for sustainable issues. I think you've now changed the word to be called responsible business. That might produce some sort of confusion to people outside.
I think that's true, but I don't think they're competing terms, actually. So in my view, responsibility is sustainability is a subset of that responsibility. And I think for most people, sustainability would have meant energy, water and waste in the past. And I think responsibility actually takes it out of that sort of very limited understanding to a much more social understanding of what business should be as well. To think about the people that the business interacts with, that it hopefully tries to improve the lives of. So I can understand that could lead to confusion, and it's the latest sort of buzz way of describing this topic, but I don't think it's competing. I think it's just broadening it to its greater and sometimes much more influential impacts.
I think the word social responsibilities rather than sustainability was the...
Yes, social impact's another way of describing generating social value. There are lots of terms, but actually what they're all meaning is not just looking at the really scientific or environmental aspects of sustainability, but looking at it much more broadly.
I'd agree. I mean, I'd disagree that people have looked at sustainability purely envirocentric. I think we've moved past that. Certainly from my experience, I think people have been looking at the triple bottom line for a number of years. Okay, they may not have been looking at it equitably, but they've certainly been addressing the three elements of sustainability. Responsible business, as I think you said, isn't a new term. It's been around for since the mid-1990s. So it's not something that's the new buzzword that's suddenly come up. There's significant amount of research and literature on responsible business going way back. As I say, I think it's just pulling everything together now. Now that social value is coming to the fore, I think it's becoming a term so people understand its fully cohesive nature of what a responsible business is. You can't look at one without the other, bolstering the social elements, and I think people will look at it in sustainability in a more equitable terminology, and as I say, have this increased transparency in reporting and hopefully trust in businesses going forward, because I think we've lost quite a lot of that over recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that for us, for this project, it will ensure that we're supporting businesses to embedding environmental, social and economic value into what they do, and how do we embed the Sustainable Development Goals into the practical day-to-day operations of managing real estate assets. So I think it's that whole wider piece and what goes behind that, from a strategic level all the way to an operational level.
Yeah. Victoria, you mentioned social value there, which is gaining a huge amount of momentum. There's a lot of talk around that. There's also been a lot of discussion, particularly for the public sector bodies, about how we measure social value.
Yeah.
Where do you think we are in terms of being able to measure, put a price on social value?
As an industry,
Yeah.
a long way away. Within our own organisation, we've spent quite a significant number of years, 2 years in fact, working with Social Value UK. And we do have a robust process, which is just going to get rubber stamped, where we've involved our stakeholders so we can understand the value attributed to that. We're not looking at inherent social value. We're not claiming for any of that. So that's the social value created of running a school or a hospital or a real estate. We're just looking at the embedded and the additional social value. Now, we're quite robust in that. We're being quite positive steps to not over-account the value of those activities. However, we have seen some pretty wild estimations of social value from some people out in the industry, where they are using inherent social value and reporting that as their own. I'm recently involved in a couple of CBI and BSA elements where we're looking at social value. So that's an intergovernmental consultation where we're trying to understand how they are going to look at that in terms of procurement. Because at the moment it's, yes, we have to evaluate, not consider social value. However, they've had these broad claims of the amount of people they're going to train up and when, but we still don't know how. And I think it's a massive element in the industry, because when you are going forward and you're putting forward tenders for public sector elements, how are they going to assess one versus the other without understanding the detail of how you have assessed and attributed a financial value to that? And I think until wider industry and government come together and say, okay, what's reasonable, I think we're going to have a lot of challenging times ahead. Not to be negative, but I think it's realistic.
Yeah, fantastic.
I don't think I'd add much more, actually. I think that was a really comprehensive answer. I think there is great disparity in understanding, which is leading to inconsistent and sometimes fraudulent calculations.
I wouldn't have gone that far, but...
And also, it makes it difficult for tender assessors to actually fairly assess what social value has been created. There's a couple of interesting exercises going on out in the industry. So Redrow, the big sort of housing builder, have come out with a calculator methodology, social value calculator methodology themselves, which is quite interesting to look at. Lend-Lease are working with a small charity called Collectively to take a sort of loneliness, one of your sort of trends that in the video was around smaller houses, but loneliness actually in cities is becoming quite a big issue that's related to that. So they're working with the charity to reimagine cities if the criteria was to remove loneliness and to mitigate loneliness. So there's some really interesting things happening out there in the industry, but a great deal of work still to be done in terms of consistency.
Fantastic.
Just an observation, and thanks very much for the video, which I think should have a parental guidance caveat with it. Some really scary numbers there, but it's the world we're living in right now. I'm just looking at, your title there, responsible business, and there's lots of different names, corporate responsibility and all of that. And I'm just it's a bit of a rhetorical statement here, but, you know, I think there's a potential opportunity here where, you know, your scope is about responsible business, but inside businesses are people, you know, and nobody works 24/7, although we seem to think that we do. And it's maybe there's an untapped opportunity that when these good corporate citizens leave work, then they take that sort of social responsibility outside of it, you know, and sort of start to have that as a way of living rather than a way of working. So it's just a little bit of rhetorical statement there. So you know, driving responsible business, I think, will have a, you know, a spin-off, a potential spin-off, where people will take it outside of the place of work. You know, even if it's, you know, your refuse collection that people now sort of work on, that goes in the recyclable, that goes in the trash. So there's an opportunity, I'm sure.
I would agree with that. The recent Edelman Trust Barometer said that 25% of people wouldn't consider working for a company who didn't consider societal issues as part of their strategy. So I think, you know, I would fully support that. I think there is this societal movement of considering more of that within your personal life. Caveat would be as long as you don't claim social value on it, because it's, as a business, that's not what you're contributing, that's the individual person themselves.
And that is a key driver for recruiting the talent of tomorrow.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's, you know, I'll say the M word, the millennial movement of working for a purpose-driven company. It's, yeah, it's very much been instilled in the next generation and the generation after that. So
It's got to be a culture, right?
yeah, exactly, that's right.
Absolutely.
There's definite change. I think you can see that just the way, like you say, the talent that's coming through the organisation, the values they place, same as what you were saying about Manish, about values, and there's a definite shift change.
Yeah, I think unfortunately Munish and I come well outside of the millennial generation here. So.
But, it's, you know, but one of your stats was about the number of generations that are in the workplace at the same time at the moment. So I've read 5 as well in some cases. I don't quite know how that works, but there's some very young starters these days. But that's also, you know, in terms of social value within the workplace and learning to work cross-generationally. And actually, there's so much blending now of what's in work and what's out of work. You know, many employers are encouraging their employees to donate their time and their skills and paying for that. And that's becoming part of the negotiation when people are joining businesses to say, how much volunteering can I do? How much are you going to pay for? And learning to work and taking on, you know, we've got an aging population, so it means people are working longer. How do we integrate those people alongside the millennials? So the whole concept of working more socially is not, I don't think it can be as easy as separating it out from what you do outside of work and what you do in work. I think it's one of the same, actually.
Just to touch on that, something that's worked really well that we've done is reverse mentoring. So we have our younger generation teaching our more mature employees things like internet skills. That's worked really well because you often think mentoring a more experienced individual teaching a younger. The reverse mentoring has been actually really successful, and it's helped bring those intergenerational groups together and work better together.
Yeah. Yes.
Just a question around the audience for what you're going to eventually end up with. Are you looking at sort of the younger generation and introducing that before they're in the business, or is it more around once you're in the business and that sort of your target audience? Because I think this is probably where you want to target the up-and-coming ones before they come into the business world.
There may be schools and stuff.
Curriculum or something. And then again, with the older generation, you know, are there ways that you can introduce this, because they would be very set in how it used to work, where you probably didn't think about the impact that the way that they worked had on the environment or social responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you can, we've already talked about how broad this area is, and also looking at the role that we've got to play as RICS is to, we've got a Royal Charter, so we've got to act and promote the public's interest, so we work on the public's advantage. And for us, we've got a massive stream of the next generation, the future generation of the profession, and looking into that. So at the moment, we're exploring a range set of solutions to meet this vast area or subject area that we're looking at. So moving forward, we'll be looking at targeting solutions depending on various things that we will undercover. To keep it as focused as possible so we can be as productive as quickly as possible, we're targeting it at the supply chain, making sure that you are procuring responsibly, looking at all of the challenges that businesses are faced with. But moving forward, that will then trickle down to our qualifications, the work that we do with future generations, diversity inclusion work that we do, and various other themes that run across to what we stand for.
And I think that the RCS, the benefit of that is just the breadth that it covers. It covers commercial, covers residential as well. So it covers all aspects in terms of the delivery of the built environments that we provide and put together.
I mean, we've got colleagues at RCS right now that are looking at defining social value from a valuation perspective and looking at sustainability and valuation, looking at land, placemaking, social value. So we cover a huge range of professionalisms, and we want to make sure that actually the solutions that we deliver out there for professionals and future generation, is fit for purpose and is future-proof. You've seen the video today that was produced, I think, 2015. Things have moved on even from that video, and we need to make sure that we're keeping up to date with developments and prepared for what the future will hold. So, there'll be an upcoming video, I'm sure, very soon on futures and all the ongoing activities that we're undertaking in this area.
And that's triple X rated, that video.
I disagree with it being a kind of a child-friendly or a rating, because I think that's the type of video that the younger generation would grasp and get straight away, and they start to be thinking about that because they're already thinking about that. But when you see the numbers and the figures and the impact, it kind of makes it more real.
Yeah, it does bring it home, and I think the younger generation now are even more advanced in some of these social issues than other generations are. You hear people at school talking about fundraising activities and the placemaking and value and everything else that comes with it. So I think we need to be prepared for that generation and their expectations as well.
My kids are going on the climate marches. I'm taking a day of school to do that. I'm looking forward to the letters from school afterwards. Are there any questions? We're coming up towards time, so we've got enough time for one more question. If not, I will take chair's privilege there. I did want to ask about the supply chain issue. So it has been a long challenge that we've had in terms of procurement and how we get these elements into procurement and to get delivered through. Lots of barriers in there in terms of how the procurement function itself takes place, but also the deliverability of the technical requirements. Have you got words of advice for the audience in terms of how those issues could be resolved, or key areas to start to look at to be able to get a better and more responsive supply chain delivery?
So I think it starts with that word responsibility again, which is investing in raising awareness with your supply chain first and foremost, and that's not a one. It's not a one effort. That's a continuous effort. Just as this is an evolving landscape, our understanding of it and the solutions that are developed to deal with it are evolving as well. So it's important to continuously do that. A lot of our UK GVC members are within supply chains, and they are working with us. We're working with their sort of clients to make sure that the level of understanding and awareness is continuously being refreshed. I think then it's about understanding the incentives in this. So there's a huge amount of incentive sharing that could be done. Big brands have an opportunity to apply their scale to very large chunks of the supply chain, but they'll only successfully do that if the supply chain also benefit from that. Yes. So take carbon efficiency, energy efficiency. There's a huge win-win, but there should be a shared benefit. That is part of the responsibility of a big brand, is to make sure that they're also seeing a benefit in that. So I think those would be my sort of initial thoughts.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I don't know if it was me or you. I don't mind. Yes, I would agree with that. I think also in terms of creating a responsible supply chain, it goes beyond looking to the traditional ones you would generally go to. So we have a range of suppliers which we engage with at various levels, depending on our relationship, based on value, risk, or financial spend. But we have put in quite a lot of work in at the moment at trying to engage social enterprises, community, voluntary organisations, so we build in the elements of societal value through our supply chain. Now, yes, there's problems associated with that. These companies are often small, they're maybe not familiar with the contractual issues which a large contractor requests of them, the ream of paperwork and various issues they have to comply with, so there are hurdles to get over that. But I think it's remiss of large organisations to just not involve those type of sector organisations just because it's a bit of a hard nut to crack. I don't know anyone who's successfully done it on a large scale yet. I know companies have relationships with various individual ones. But from my perspective, that's something I'll really be focusing on in the next few years. I think our major supply chain itself, we've got a lot of initiatives involved, similar to what you say, upskilling them. I'm a board member of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and that's a fantastic resource for our supply chain because it's free at the point of entry. And it always surprises me how many people don't actually know about it, because it has been around since 2015. So that's a really good resource for our supply chains, and they're changing their platform now. So for partner organisations, it's much easier for you to effectively engage your supply chain through that, identifying where the supply chain's good, where they're not so good, linking them together, collaborative upskilling. So there's quite a lot of opportunities, and I think those two elements would be my focus and lessons learned, I think.
Yeah. I think for me, I think you mentioned it, Victoria, about transparency and the need to work closer together and working with the supply chain at the right phase and time and explaining what drives you as a business. And I think you've mentioned the key enablers that we're focusing within this project about the people and the culture. And it's amazing how much, just somebody changing at the very top and how that culture change has an impact on the entire supply chain. And how do we facilitate that culture, that positive culture change to happen? And how do you make sure that when you are procuring your services, you are thinking with that culture change in mind? I think a lot as the industry evolves and moves forward, more solutions will come out to facilitate a better and more responsible supply chain. So it's going to be a very interesting time, and we'll look to see how that evolves.
Yep. I think the cooperation collaboration point is very vital. I guess if you're looking at it from a supplier's perspective and they have 5 different clients who are requesting information in a very slightly different way, that becomes an incredibly burdensome challenge for them to undertake. So understanding what the current, whatever theme or criteria you're looking at, working with your supplier on, understanding what the current market offerings are out there, and not trying to completely reinvent the wheel, because the chances are there are things out there which you can utilise, which they're already taking part in. So creating that engagement with the suppliers would be a very good first step, I would say.
Yeah. I think just to add, I think be fair to your suppliers. There was, I can't remember which article it was in which journal, sorry, about payment terms.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue, for public procurement, that's going to change. You're going to have to pay in the 30 days going forward. It's going to be back to back. And there's many organisations who have ridden the wave of late paying their supply chain. And, it's just not on. It's just not being a responsible business. So I think it goes both ways, really. You have to treat your supply chain right and work better together. We all have a part to play in going towards a responsible world.
Right.
Yeah, I would mirror that. Everybody's got a role to play, and I think taking some of the lessons learned from organisations that are demonstrating responsible business at its best, I think that's a brilliant way to sort of move forward and take some lessons learned and improve and innovate.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much to the panel. If you'd like to thank the panel in the usual way. This isn't a subject that's going to go away. I think it's going to be around. From the RICS perspective, it's a journey that we're on. If you wish to collaborate with us, we'd be more than happy to hear from you as well. But again, from a UK GBC perspective, Vinci as well and SFMI, there's a huge amount of work that's going along as well, free to access information. Please make use of it. Thank you very much.